But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the College Football Playoff Committee handles all these teams with all these different schedules and what it all means for the college football playoff picture as a whole. Now, for people who do not know this, understand, obviously, the college football playoff comes. There is no committee, or there's a committee, but there are no minimum game standards. So, for example, if an SEC team plays 11 games, if an ACC team plays 11 games, and a Big Ten team only plays 9 games or maybe 8 games if a game gets canceled, there's nothing keeping the 7-win or 8-win Big Ten team out, but it's going to be a case-by-case basis. And so I do think that this will be one of the more interesting storylines to follow throughout college football season is how do we handle this college football playoff? And I don't think right now, as I record here on September 21st September 20th into September 21st, I don't think that there is an obvious, easy answer to this, right? And there's some times, and we've talked about this on all sorts of shows in the past, there are some times where I come on and I have a strong opinion and this is how it's going to be. That's how it's going to be. And there are other times where I just say, frankly, guys, girls, I don't really know. And I think this is one of those cases because not only do I not know what's going to happen, I don't think the people that are actually on the college football playoff selection committee knows what's going to happen. What will it look like when an Ohio State is taking the field for the first time when Notre Dame and Clemson essentially have half of their schedule already in the books? Same with Alabama or LSU or Florida or Georgia. That's going to have 3, 4, 5 games in the books before Ohio State even takes the field for the first time. And so I think it's something interesting to follow. I also think it goes back to what I was talking about off the top with the Big Ten schedule, where I really do wish, listen, to backtrack, I don't want to keep crushing the Big Ten, but sometimes I do think that even when they re-put this schedule back together, I do think they really tried to outthink the room and prove they're smarter than everybody and prove they care more than everybody, which is what they did 5 weeks ago when they canceled the season in the first place. But it feels like they did it again in putting together this schedule. And last episode, I probably did not do a good enough job explaining this, but the Big Ten has basically backed themselves into a corner where they are going to hope and pray that daily testing works and that daily testing limits or eliminates, is probably the right way to put it, big outbreaks on these teams. Because if you look at what the Big Ten's protocols are, here are the Big Ten's protocols. If you test positive, you will not be able to play for 21 days. Yes, you read that. You heard that correctly. If you test positive, you will not be able to play for 21 days, which means if Justin Fields tests positive on a Friday, we're talking about potentially 3 missed games for Justin Fields, which of course is a third of the season. Same with the backup offensive tackle at Northwestern or the kicker at Illinois. It is an insane protocol that seems insanely tough to follow. And if we've learned anything early in this season, it is that positive tests are going to happen. We have had games canceled over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. We had Baylor-Houston canceled a week after it came together. We had BYU-Army canceled this weekend in what would have been maybe the game of the weekend, and it was really disappointing, but it's really the reality of where we are in college football right now. The reality is we have student athletes who are on campus with other students. Many of these students go to class every day, interact with other students, and even if you're taking all the proper protocols, it's impossible to limit how much exposure that you can have to the outside world. And so with that, I bring all this up as it pertains to the Big Ten, because the Big Ten really has backed themselves in a corner. They have backed themselves in a corner where the testing protocols are insane, and they're playing 8 games in 8 weeks, 0 buys, right into that conference championship game in week 9. And I do worry that it's going to screw things up for the Big Ten, that it's going to cost them potentially a playoff berth. But I do believe that at the very least, I do think what's going to be interesting is to see how it affects the playoff conversation. Will it impact a playoff berth? I don't know. But I do think it will impact the playoff conversation, because just think about it from the perspective that I just said. Remember, I just said a minute ago They're playing 8 games in 8 weeks with a 9th game on that last weekend. But even before the Big Ten kicks off, ACC teams are going to have 5 games under their belts. The SEC is going to have 3 or 4 games under their belts going into that weekend. And so when I look at the situation in the Big Ten, it leaves the league essentially zero room for error, right? And everyone want to praise the Big Ten and, oh, they took their time and they made sure they got it right and they waited for rapid testing. Well, dude, it only takes one team to screw this whole thing up. Because what you got to remember is it's not only the best teams that are going to be impacted, but all the teams, right? Even if Ohio State does everything right, what if they're supposed to play Illinois or Rutgers or Penn State, and Penn State has a bunch of positive tests and they can't play? Now all of a sudden Ohio State's down to 7 games with an 8th game for a conference championship. What happens if they lose a game somewhere along the way? What happens to that conversation? Are we talking about a 7-1 Ohio State team, a 6-1 Ohio State team, and how are we comparing it to the rest of college football? Are we going to punish a team like, say, Notre Dame, which is probably the second best team in the ACC? Are we going to punish that team that's been on the field since the first weekend in September and not let them in the playoff if, say, Notre Dame's 9-2? How do you compare a 9-2 Notre Dame or a 9-2 Georgia? Or heck, how about a 10-1 Georgia with an 8-0 Ohio State? And so I do think because of the buzz they have and because of their potential once they take the field, I do believe Ohio State will have the benefit of the doubt. But again, one, I think they're going to have to win all their games because of the fact that they are so far behind the 8 ball. And then 2, on top of that, they better make sure they get all their games in. They better really hope that Rutgers and Maryland and Michigan and Michigan State and all these teams do what they're supposed to do so that Ohio State can get the requisite games to get in a potential playoff situation. It's the same with Michigan. It's the same with Penn State, the same with Wisconsin, Minnesota. Whoever thinks they can get in that college football playoff conversation, they better hope all their not only that they take care of the situation, but that their opponents take care of what they're supposed to at their facilities, on their campuses. Because like I said, I'm just telling you right now, it is going to be the single biggest, most fascinating conversation come playoff time. What do you do with a 7-1 or a 7-0 or an 8-0 Ohio State team versus a Georgia team that's maybe 10-1 in the SEC or a Florida team that went 10-1? It's just going to be fascinating. It is going to be interesting. The Big Ten did themselves no favors, but I will give them credit. We got the schedule, and I am obviously, you can hear it in my voice, I am fired up for what is ahead in Big Ten play.